My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic multiverses. Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
Listen to us if you want to live.
I so desperately wanted to do an Austrian Arnold accent for the intro, but I find there's only certain lines from certain movies he's in that I can do.
Yeah, well, that's usually how impressions go at the beginning. You just like you have like one sentence that you have to say. I used to be able to do an Irish accent, but I can't remember what it was. That it was a sentence. It was something Colin Farrell says in an episode of Scrubs that he's in. And if I said that sentence with his accent, I could do a decent Irish accent. But after that, it would just kind of dwindle off and be terrible.
Like I can say, put that cookie down pretty well.
Yeah.
But outside of that, get to the chopper. But like anything he says is the Terminator. It's kind of...
I'll be back. Well, it's also interesting. I mean, this is pre-show factoid, I guess. But Schwarzenegger didn't actually want to say I'll be back because he thought that the Terminator, being a machine, would be more clinical and would say, I will be back, because he wouldn't use alliteration, which actually, when you think about it long enough, is like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. But, as it goes, the director told him it would be better. He trusted, and it's become one of his most iconic line of any movie.
Before we dive into the Terminator series, though, we do have a couple Doom's non-delays.
Oh, more things are... Studios are realizing that theaters might be viable.
Yes. So the third Fantastic Beasts movie, which is apparently subtitled The Secrets of Dumbledore.
There was a second one?
Yes, it was called The Crimes of Grindelwald.
I thought that was the first one.
No, the first one was called Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
Oh man, okay, those two, the first two installments of that franchise I've just completely blurred in my mind. Like all the Transformers movies.
Well, it was supposed to come out July 15th, 2022, but we're now going to get it on April 15th, 2022.
Oh, wow. That's quite a decent, push forward, I guess, if it's not a push back.
We should also point out that Jam Jam is making her first appearance on the podcast.
Yes, you may hear some beautiful, adorable grunts.
We've had many a child appear on the podcast, so Jam Jam is the first official podcast baby.
Yes, because she was born after I joined the podcast.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I saw the second one, but not the first one. And I only saw it because I was on a date, and the person who was ongoing that wanted to see it. So I really have no genuine interest in these Harry Potter universe prequels.
Yeah, prequels / spin-offs, though, which is weird. Like, I always thought that was a little weird. Like, it's almost a spin-off because it's set in America, right? Or am I going crazy?
The first one is, but the second one goes back to Europe.
Okay, I thought it was just like, no, this is... Okay, but Europe or England?
I can't even remember.
All right, well, we'll be looking forward to that movie coming early.
I wonder what Dumbledore's secrets are.
Oh, I mean, other than he's gay, right?
Yeah, I guess that was never really officially said in the movies or in the books. but it
Or in
was
the books or anywhere,
except for the
until it.
statements. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about. Well, have we ever talked about Harry Potter on the podcast?
Oh, we have. Yeah, there's been a couple
Okay,
episodes.
good. So I
We
don't
got,
have to.
I got put under fire for one of them because I was like making these grand kind of judgments of the Harry Potter universe because I hadn't read enough of the books to understand it. So
Oh no, the Harry Potter universe makes no sense. I've talked to Harry Potter fans, and it's like, nah, it makes no sense.
um, the movie that just won't die, Clifford the Big Red Dog, is back on the release schedule for November 10th, 2021.
I am simultaneously so happy and completely indifferent.
Oh, like I thought when they removed it from the release schedule, it was gonna get like pushed to like
Axed.
like pushed off. I thought it was. I didn't think they were just not releasing
Whatever the direct to DVD equivalent is, direct to streaming.
direct to streaming. But no, it's getting a theatrical release November 10th, the week
Oh,
after Eternals, the week before Ghostbusters Afterlife.
wow, that's a really terrible place to be. It will forever be compared to those two movies.
I mean, I guess it's this good sign that like people are taking, after Shang-Chi has done well, they're like, all right, let's do it. Let's put more movies out. I'm like, yeah. Sure.
Well, I've even heard like people wanting to go see Shang-Chi like a second time and being like, yes, theaters, let's do this.
And then this isn't really a doomsday. It's just a movie that's officially getting a release date. But the Super Mario Brothers movie that's being made by Illumination Entertainment now has a release date.
Oh, it's being made by Illumination. That makes it even more of an ugh than it previously was.
It's
have they learned nothing? Well, I guess Sonic did decently, so maybe they have learned something.
It's going to come out December 21st, 2022.
Oh, they're making it a Christmas movie?
A movie to come out over Christmas, yes.
Well, I mean...
Listen, the Jumanji movies, which are video game movies, came out over the Christmas break and did well.
Actually, they're a board game movie that became...
You know what I mean.
No, that's true, but it's still not the same. Like, again, it's video game inspired movies, and video game movies are not the same thing, sure. Right?
But I know you don't like Despicable Me, but I enjoy the Sing movies that Illumination's made, and their Grinch movie wasn't that bad.
I haven't seen the Grinch movie. The Sing movie was more or less a movie, but also more or less just a bunch of animated music video. Look, the Sing movie is a movie the same way that The Greatest Showman is a movie. Not really, but kind of. I make a lot of people upset with that one. I shouldn't have dropped that randomly in an episode.
Now, they also announced some of the voice cast for the Super Mario movies. I don't know if you heard about this.
Yes, and although I have yet to watch it, I know that Video Game Donkey made a react video to that, which I'm looking forward to. Chris
Pratt is going to be Mario.
Weird choice.
Anya Taylor-Joy from New Mutants and the Queen's Gambit. And she'll also be the young Furiosa in that Furiosa movie. She's Peach.
Okay. Yeah, fair.
Keegan-Michael Key is Toad.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Seth Rogen is Donkey Kong.
Oh, why? No, no. Look, it's not just the whole Seth Rogen thing, but that's actively a terrible choice.
And my favorite pick, Jack Black is going to be Bowser.
See, Jack Black should be Donkey Kong. And I wouldn't mind Seth Rogen being Bowser. Right? I feel like that, reverse those two roles, and the movie already becomes a lot better.
And Luigi will be played by Charlie Day.
I'm not sure who that is.
Have you seen Pacific Rim?
Yes.
He's one of those scientist guys.
Oh, that's not super helpful. I don't remember it that well.
He's from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
He's that guy where there's that meme with like the conspiracy board.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's...
He's also Benny the space, the astronaut Lego man in the Lego movie.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, that's okay. So one voice cast sounds okay.
What? You don't think Chris Pratt can be Mario?
Nope. I think that both in a realistic Mario and in trying to be a high-pitched Italian voiced by a very old man, He doesn't work.
Very old man. Let me look this up. Chris Pratt can't be that old.
No, I'm talking about the original voice actor for Mario.
Oh, you mean Charles Martinet?
Yes.
Who I met once. Very nice
He
man.
is pretty old.
I mean, he's got white hair. He's probably in his 60s, but I don't know if I would call him very old.
He's been voicing Mario for a long time. I think he might have started young.
All right, I'm gonna Google his age because I want the universe to know. Martinet. Okay, he was born in 1955. He's 66 years old. So
Huh. Okay, he is younger than I thought he was. My apologies.
but I think it'll be decent. I mean, we'll have to like see what they sound like when we get a trailer. But
I mean, we'll have to see what they choose to as a story. I think more importantly.
fair enough. One more bit of like random trivia before we get into talking about the Terminator movies. This past week, I realized that Ben McKenzie and Jeffrey Wright have two very specific things in common.
Okay.
You want to take a guess at what these? There's two things that these two actors have done and nobody else has.
Okay. Well, stayed under Beef Pork Ribs' radar for one. And I don't
do you
know
know
what
who
the
Ben
second-
McKenzie and Jeffrey Wright are?
Ben McKenzie sounds vaguely familiar, so I might.
He was on the OC back in the day.
Oh yeah, that doesn't help.
Well, anyway, these actors are the only actors that I know of who have played Jim Gordon in live action, but also doing the voice of Batman in an animated project.
Interesting. Okay.
Because this past week, they've launched a new Batman audio podcast that's like a radio drama.
Okay, yeah.
And in it, Jeffrey Wright is the voice of Batman. He's also the voice of the Watcher in What If you're probably heard him there.
Yes.
And he's also going to play Commissioner Gordon in The Batman with Robert
Okay, so he
Pattinson.
hasn't done it yet, but he
Hasn't
will
done it
be
yet.
doing. Okay.
Ben McKenzie was the voice of Batman in the animated version of Batman Year One.
Okay, yeah.
And then he played Jim Gordon on Gotham.
Oh, okay. Oh, wait. No, never mind. I was thinking of another actor who was on Gotham.
So I just think that's neat.
So we just need Gary, but Gary Oldman could voice Batman, and honestly, Gary Oldman could voice Batman. And then we'd have a
he
third
could join
person.
the party, but
But I feel
I
like
just think
that is still a very exclusive club.
yeah, I think it's pretty cool. These two actors have done these very specific things to like have that status.
Yeah, interesting. I like it.
But we are officially here today to talk about the Terminator franchise.
Bum bum
Today-
bum bum bum.
Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun,
Yeah.
to date, there have been 6 feature films and a short-lived television series set in the Terminator universe.
Yeah. Interesting that. I don't know. Like, I feel like it's this weird thing where I feel like the Terminator universe had enough potential to spawn way more than that. And then also more good movies than it did. But I guess we'll get into that later.
Well, yeah, so we'll focus mostly on the movies because while I have heard of the Sarah Connor Chronicles TV show, I haven't seen any of it.
That's fair. Yeah, I haven't either. I remember wanting to watch it, and then I didn't. But it got canceled, right? As I recall.
Well, it was made by Fox, so you bet it was canceled.
Yeah. fair enough.
But I would imagine it's probably on Disney Plus of all things now because it was made by Fox.
Oh, probably. I will have to check that out. I should have checked that out before the podcast, but
Let me see. I'm going to look right now, actually. Disney Plus. Tell me. Wonder if all the Terminator movies are on here, actually.
well, no, because they. Oh, possibly.
Oh, no. The closest thing to Terminator is something called Terminal Velocity,
Oh, I know that movie.
which I think is that Jean-Claude Van Damme there?
Pretty sure it is.
Yeah. So none of the Terminator, but actually that kind of makes sense because one detail about the Terminator franchise is that the rights changed hands a lot because the original one, James Cameron sold the idea to like a movie studio that doesn't exist anymore, and So all the different movies have been seemingly released by different production companies.
Really? I mean, that would explain their. How do I say this without being mean? Well, it's not mean, but like, the Terminator movies, except for the last two, kind of don't really seem to share a unified vision at all. Like, 1 and 2 work together, but are still different enough that, if you told me it was completely different people who worked on it, I'd be like, yeah, okay, I understand.
Well, let's start with our secret origin segments.
Oh, yeah.
How were you introduced to the Terminator franchise? Do you remember when it would have been, what the first movie you would have watched was?
I mean, I was aware of Arnold Schwarzenegger as an actor, and I knew he played this robot man. And then when I was in my first year of university, I watched way too many Watch Mojo videos and was looking at, I don't know, I just, it's when I started buying movies for myself and watching movies that weren't just my family movies. And I bought the Terminator and Terminator 2 and watched them with little prior knowledge other than, a few one-liners. And they were great and I love them. And I would recommend everybody who wants to get into Terminator do exactly that. Watch the first two and then
stop.
Yep, exactly.
I think I was actually like first introduced to the Terminator universe through the Wayne's World movie. Because there's one random scene where the T-1000 shows up and like pulls Wayne over, and he like shows up the pictures like, have you seen this boy? And Wayne like freaks out and drives off.
Oh yeah, that was like. But I watched the Terminator movies before I watched Wayne's World, so
okay.
I was still.
See, I didn't get it at all as a kid. I'm like, is he just scared of this cop or what? Like, it made no sense to me why, like why he'd be so afraid. And it makes sense. Wayne's World, the movie, came out like the year after Terminator 2 did, so
really?
Naturally everyone would have recognized Robert Patrick as the T-1000.
I mean, I feel like people still, everybody still recognizes him as such. He hasn't. He's had trouble shaking off that role, which, to be fair, is, one of the downsides of giving an iconic performance.
Yeah, so I knew Arnold Schwarzenegger mostly from other movies he did in the 90s, things like Jingle All the Way, Batman and Robin. I can't remember the moment when I've actually would have like heard of the Terminator franchise. I remember being old enough that when Terminator 3 came out in theaters, I was like, oh, this is a movie, but I hadn't seen the other two, and it was rated R, so I couldn't have seen it.
Mm-hmm. I actually think Terminator is the first Arnold Schwarzenegger movie I ever saw. No, I mean, it's the second one, but like, I watched Jingle All the Way in French in one of my classes and didn't really pay attention to it when I was in elementary school. I don't think that counts.
No, probably not. But I think Terminator Salvation actually was the first Terminator movie I watched all the way through.
Oh,
and that's
not
one.
Bad.
Yeah, that one you can kind of watch without having seen the other ones because it's sort of set off on its own.
Yeah, you just get a little confused when bad CGI Arnold Schwarzenegger shows up at the end.
Yeah. So I think after I saw that one, it would have been like 5 years later, I saw Terminator 2.
Oh, wow. You went completely in the wrong order.
Oh, I'm totally wrong order. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I went and saw the first Terminator after that. I was like kind of surprised how different it was.
Yeah. I think I've watched the entire Terminator series, except for the ones I haven't seen, in order, though. Well, in order of release, not in, because you started with the first one, kind of, or the last one. Time travel is hard.
And then I saw Terminator Genesis in theaters in 2015. I was so disappointed by it that when they announced Dark Fate, the final one, I was like, no, I'm not going to go see this. And so I only watched that this week. I saw it for the
first time. We have
time
that in common. Week. I mean, I didn't even finish Genesis. I wasn't actually able to sit through all of it. But to be fair, I had seen T3, so I wasn't going in with high hopes.
So yes, if you can't tell from our conversation already, the Terminator franchise has very high highs and very low lows.
Yeah, and the Sarah Connor's Chronicles might be somewhere in the middle, but it definitely the movies are very up and down.
Yeah, as a franchise, it falls so painfully into the trap of repeating itself.
Ah,
Like you could do the same Blu-ray case description for most of them.
yeah, and which is funny because the first two you could, but you would be doing an injustice to the movies. But then the third one is like, oh no, it's you ruined everything the first two movies did. Which, yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll talk about that more. But yeah, the reason I keep saying there's only 3 Terminator movies, I refer to it as a trilogy. I am talking about Terminator 1, Terminator 2, and Terminator Salvation, um, because those are the 3 good and okay ones, and then the other ones. I mean, to be fair, Dark Fate. I haven't. You said you saw it.
I have seen it now. Yes,
Is it as is?
it's
Where does
it's
it
a
stand?
better version of T3.
So it's still not very good. If it's, I don't know. I think even a better version of T3 isn't great because
Well, in a vacuum, like I was like, I'm enjoying this while I'm watching it, but then it's one of those movies where, as you digest it and as you sit with it, you're like, oh yeah, that was a lot like the other ones. And
okay,
like, I guess you could compare it to The Force Awakens, where people, kind of dislike that movie because of how similar it is to A New Hope in terms of Star Wars films.
right.
And I guess if your mileage will vary in terms of how much you can enjoy more of the same.
Yeah, except I don't know how much are we going to talk about the plot because I feel like I have to go into spoilers to kind of
Yeah,
go
I
into
mean,
why that's not entirely true.
yeah. So we're gonna spoil all the Terminator
Guys,
movies
these movies
here.
have been out for like 30 years.
Yeah, well, the first one, yes. The
Second one,
the newest one's only been out for 2 years.
okay,
So
but
yeah,
this
spoilers for all 6 Terminator movies here. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we should probably explain just a bit of the history.
Do you want me to do the Blu-ray case?
Yes, do the Blu-ray case description for most of the Terminator movies.
Somebody is very important to a post-apocalyptic future where robots take over the world. 2 people have gone back in time to save them. One to save them, one to kill them. Who will win? Well, in the first 2 movies it was obvious, but after that they just kind of said, whatever.
Can the future be changed? Do we have predetermined fate?
Yeah, those were great themes.
So the original one came out in 1984. It was made on a budget of $6 million. And you might be like, what does that mean? Well, to give context, the most expensive movie made in the 80s, Rambo 3, was made on a budget of like $60 million.
Oh,
The
1/10 of Rambo 3.
The 1989 Batman movie had a budget of like $40-50 million, I believe. So bear in mind that this was a very small budget film, to the point some of the locations they used for filming, they didn't have like the paperwork to actually use them. Like they didn't pay. So they
Is
were
that
like,
why so much of the movie is filmed at night?
yes, in part. And apparently like the franticness of like the actors on set was partially because they were kind of like worried the cops would show up in town and tell them to like leave where they were.
That's amazing. I did not know that.
So it's a low budget kind of independent film. And some of the visual effects are very dated for, based on 2021 standards. But if you look at it through the lens of like what was available in 1984,
I mean, but they were also like practical / stop motion effects, which are pretty good. Like, which don't age amazingly, but also don't age as poorly as like old CGI.
yes, that's fair. It's like you can tell it's not happening, but at least it looks better than
Yeah,
some
and
bad
it was
CGI.
like it was a robot exoskeleton that was stop motion, so it's you could justify it a little bit.
Yeah. So it very much is a science fiction film because it's, of course, it involves people time traveling and there's robots and whatnot. But it kind of is an 80s horror film, like a slasher film, basically.
But with guns.
Because the whole movie,
9mm.
the whole movie, there's this killer robot from the future in the body of Arnold Schwarzenegger, meant to be an infiltration unit. And I don't know how they think that guy could blend in anywhere.
Maybe in the post-apocalyptic future, there's a lot more buff guys because of radiation. Maybe Fist of the North Star was right, and everybody just ends up either dead or super buff.
And it's kind of I think the small budget actually benefits the first Terminator because you get this you feel very kind of closed in, and you feel the kind of the horror of what Sarah Connor is experiencing of being chased by this
Yeah.
robot, and they don't have to show you a lot of the future sci-fi stuff. They kind of lean into performers kind of describing this future. And even though horror movies aren't my thing and slasher movies are not my thing, I, again, having seen it after Terminator 2, I thought the first Terminator was a really great 80s slasher movie.
Yeah, and honestly, if you saw it after 2, because, I mean, we said we would spoil. 2 is a better movie.
Oh,
Just
two is the
objectively,
best.
like, across
Yeah.
the board, 2 is the best movie. I don't think anybody doesn't agree with that. I mean, I've never met anybody who thinks that another movie in the Terminator franchise is better. But
Yeah.
you're entitled to your own opinion, but there's a lot of objective reasons why 2 works better.
Well, I mean, some people say Terminator 2 Judgment Day is the best sequel ever.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and yeah. Because, and I don't know if have you ever had one of those like lists of like what makes a good sequel?
Maybe.
Because I feel like we talked about sequels in an episode where we were like, because it's expands on themes of the original, adds new depth to it, it leaves a lasting effect on the franchise, and still manages to tell its own story. And Terminator 2 absolutely is all of those things and then some.
Yeah, so writer and director James Cameron, who people would know from making Titanic and Avatar and Aliens, he wrote and directed the first Terminator. It was modestly successful considering its budget, enough that he was able to secure financing for a sequel on a much larger budget. And when you see T2, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, that came out 7 years later, at my year of birth, 1991, not yours, but mine.
Nope. Not quite.
It is a much larger film, and it, as you say, it kind of it continues the story, it evolves the world, but everything that's in T2 is just a better version of what's in the first film.
Yeah. Also, fun fact, Photoshop was made for T2.
Really?
Yep, because of the special visual effects, it was the kind of beginning of like computer 3D animation, and what they ended up doing is doing a lot of image blending of real images with computer generated images, and as a result, Photoshop was developed, or what became Photoshop was developed for that movie, because they did a lot of like frame by frame reconstruction for some of the animation.
Now, if you were a huge fan of the 80s slasher movie vibe of the first film, admittedly, you might feel a little jarring coming into T2 because it evolves into this kind of action blockbuster. And it flips the script on its head a bit because Arnold in the first film, his robot is the villain who's trying to kill the main character.
And the skinny white boy is the hero.
In the second one, through clever writing choices, his robot is a good guy this time. And so the character who everyone thought was the villain the last time has now been turned into the hero.
Yeah. But also it doesn't rely on that. I hear like there's because there is the iconic scene where like the two time travelers are going towards the guy they're supposed to protect, and Schwarzenegger pulls out the shotgun from like a pack of roses. Apparently, if you'd seen that movie with no spoilers, like people were like super nervous about that, and it was like it was a kind of a big mind blown. But like good twists, it doesn't take away from the movie if you know it going in.
Yeah.
I feel like that one scene might lose a little bit of impact, but even if you don't know, like, I don't know, I'm not going to spoil everything in that scene, because there's another thing you discover in that scene which is great, which I think shouldn't be spoiled, but like it still has good tension. It's still well built. The music, the like cuts of both people going towards John, and like everything just works on a really cool level. That movie. but also, sorry, I got sidetracked by that. But like to your earlier point, um, yeah, if you were a fan of like kind of the slasher and going into it, but at the same time, it was the early '90s. Everything was an action blockbuster at that point, and like, and also like if you'd seen sequels, like the sequel to Alien, Aliens was an action blockbuster. Sequel to Terminator, Terminator 2 instead of Terminators, thankfully, which it could have been because there's two of them. But anyway, is an action blockbuster. It's just what you did.
I'm realizing I wonder if James Cameron's experience on Aliens, because he didn't do the first Alien, that was Ridley Scott. I wonder if his experience doing Aliens and taking that movie that would have been this like, kind of thriller, horror, sci-fi movie, and then kind of multiplying and evolving it into an action movie. Maybe that's where he got the idea to do Terminator 2 the way they ended up doing it.
Maybe. I feel like it's one of those things. It's also like James Cameron is great at doing sequels. It helps when it was. I feel like T2 might have a little bit more of the kind of original vision because he was the one who did the first Terminator movie, and this is just like maybe a slightly better version of it or more polished.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that T2 is like. I mean, it is unilaterally better, but it's not just because Terminator 1 was bad. It's because everything was just kind of done on the next level, including visual effects and like
The
we
visual
talked
effects
about
are
the budget.
astounding. Like,
There's like almost no explosions in the first one. There's a lot in the second one, but
I remember seeing T2 in like 2014. I think I remember seeing it the same week I saw the fourth Transformers movie. And I was just amazed how, like, yes, the T1000 and liquid metal, like that looked really impressive. But even just a lot of the other visual effects, I'm like, this feels like a much more
the
recent movie
chase
than.
scene
Yeah.
with a truck driving off a bridge and motorcycle right in front of it. Oh,
Yeah.
classics.
It's great. And I think Linda Hamilton, her version of Sarah Connor, she's probably like done the best service in Terminator 2 because, in the first one, she's basically like this damsel in distress that has to be saved by Kyle Reese. But the way that they wrote her character in the second one, it gave her a lot to do as an actor, and it made her like an action hero in and of herself.
Yeah, and again, T2 changed the franchise, right? Like, and I feel like even retroactively, Terminator 2 made her cooler at the end of T1, if you know what I mean. Like, because at the end of the Terminator 1, she is alone, kind of the cool chick, slightly hardened and ready to take on her mission. And it's cool. But then when you see what she's become in the next movie, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so much, like, knowing that the end result of that wasn't just, a girl who was a damsel in distress and then was gritted for 2 weeks and then gave up. No, it's like she dedicated her entire life to that cause. And it's more than just lip service, which was what you get in the first movie.
Now, most of these Terminator movies involve science fiction. And by science fiction, I mean time travel. Terminator Salvation is the only one that's like fully set in the post-apocalyptic future that all the other movies talk about. So there's no real time travel in that film. And for most of them, time travel isn't really central to the plot. Like Terminator Genesis is the only one where time travel is like a major point of the plot, and that's part of the movie's downfall.
Yeah.
For most of them, the time travel is merely just a means for the killer robots to arrive in present day.
Yeah, but as well as especially in the first two, pretty strongly a setup for the themes of fate and choices.
Yeah,
because the Terminator movies, well, the first two Terminator movies are a closed loop. They're an absolute where, like, in the future, the past has already been changed.
Yeah, it's sort of
well,
confusing.
The first one. The second one kind of toes that line in a really fun way.
Yeah, it gets kind of confusing because, again, this is spoilers, but who cares?
Yeah.
Kyle Reese is the father of John Connor, but Kyle Reese is from the future, so the only way that John Connor's ever born is that he's sent back in time.
He sends back his best friend in time so that he can seduce his mother. Well, and also save her.
But in order for Kyle Reese to be there in the past, that would mean that John Connor would have to be in the future in order to send him.
Yeah, but that's why I said it's a closed loop. It's everything that happened. There's no alternate storyline or changes in the first Terminator movie.
Correct. And then in the second one, it does sort of repeat the plot a bit, right? Because it's still about a Terminator being sent back to try and kill Sarah Connor, or rather John Connor at this point because he's born. But then they add the extra, well, we're going to send another good Terminator back to stop the bad Terminator. And in theory, yeah, that movie ends with them destroying everything that will become Skynet. So in theory, the way the second one ends, you think, oh, like they're safe now because there's no way that the Terminators will ever be created.
And then the third movie ignores everything the first two movies did and decides to do something.
Yeah, so Terminator 2 is, I think, one of the best sequels ever made, and it's definitely the best Terminator movie by far, unfortunately. And you're right, it does close the loop. Like if the whole franchise was just those two movies, that would be great. But
Well,
unfortunately,
can I just put a slight caveat to that? I think the Terminator universe had more to offer, just not in the direction T3 went. Like I think that the Sarah Connor's Chronicles still made sense on paper, and I still think that like Terminator Salvation still worked. Like there were still things that could be done within the universe that were interesting. It's just that Terminator 3 just wasn't one of those things. It was, like you said earlier, Terminator 3 is very much repeating what was in the earlier movies just for the sake of repeating it, rather than adding something new or adding any kind of nuance or improvement.
yeah, so I don't think James Cameron had any intention of making a third Terminator because the way the second one ends, it feels very definitive. Like you say, the loop has been closed. It seems like the future's been changed. And it seems like John and Sarah Connor can like live in peace now because they've destroyed everything that would lead to the creation of Skynet. They should be able to lead happy lives. And then 12 years go by in the real world. Somebody else somehow gets the rights to making another Terminator movie, and they think, you know what would be the best way to continue this story is to just make another movie exactly like the last one that came out that was so successful.
Except clearly not everybody believed in it because only one actor came back.
Well, for some reason they decided to kill off Sarah Connor. I don't know if it's because Linda Hamilton like wouldn't come back, or they had to find a way to get her out of it. And then I guess they wanted to age up John Connor. I guess Edward Furlong, who played John Connor in the second one, didn't really like stick with acting. So
yeah, like that one I can understand, but at the same time, it's, I don't know. It definitely feels like it's one of those like everything all the things I listed off about what a sequel should do.
Yeah,
Terminator 3 fails at.
Yeah,
it actively regresses the themes and doesn't build up on anything. It retcons a bunch of things. Skynet still exists because now Skynet is a program.
Yeah, it completely...
Which would have existed independently of the technology, which goes against everything Terminator 2 was setting up for the creation of Skynet as well.
Yeah,
There were so many bad decisions.
Yeah. I haven't watched Terminator 3. I don't know. I've just heard people talk about it, and that's sort of what they complain about, is that it feels like the people who made Terminator 3 didn't even watch the second one.
Yeah, and they also just decide and again, they watched the second one and didn't understand what worked. Like they watched the second one, they were like, "Oh, one of the Terminators has new powers. Let's give our Terminator new powers." But what makes the T-1000 so terrifying, but also a great villain, is that it had very specific limitations, right? It could shapeshift into anything, but it couldn't make complex machinery like a bomb or a gun because it could only take like solid form, right? And then in Terminator 3, it's like, oh no, she can create plasma cannons because why not? And also hack into, I did air quotes when I said hack, other vehicles and control them from afar by leaving part of her inside their computers or something. I never quite understood that, like how they justified that logic.
Yeah, so Terminator 3 suggests, oh, you thought you destroyed Skynet, but actually, like, the timeline found a way for Skynet to still exist, and Judgment Day, where everyone dies, still happens. It just happens later.
And
So
Sarah Connors isn't there to help.
yeah, and so John Connor still has to be protected. Maybe if you buy this as like a branch timeline, it's like, oh, this is an alternate reality or something. But the movie Terminator 3 never really like makes that clear. It kind of suggests that it's the same
Very heavily that
continuity.
it's still the same thing. Yeah. Even
Uh,
with like the whole who sent the Terminator back in time and why, which was also a really weird thing because it also implies things that happen in the future timeline that never should have happened and that canonically, if you listen to the first, like to what they say in the first two movies, is categorically impossible to happen.
yeah, so I'm actually gonna jump right here to like discuss Terminator Dark Fate because
All right.
Terminator 3 and Terminator Dark Fate kind of fall into the same trap of essentially remaking Terminator 2 because in Terminator Dark Fate, it's kind of like an alternate timeline. It's a world where T2 happened as it normally did. But then sometime after that, you see a scene where like teenager John Connor is gunned down by a T-800 and Sarah Connor's left there to like hold her dead child in her arms. And you flash forward to like modern day and it turns out there's this Mexican woman who's being hunted by Terminators, and it's not a Terminator that's been sent back to protect her, but an enhanced human being.
Yeah, and I mean I haven't seen it, but it's just this weird thing where like again, you watched Terminator 2, but you didn't acknowledge that all the changes it made from the first to the second were there to enhance or build on what was already existing in the franchise. They weren't just changes for the sake of changes. And I feel like that's what both Dark Fate and T3 had, is that they just made changes for the sake of changes. The changes weren't aimed at something specific. They were just, I feel like I feel like Dark World they were aimed at being, having more female representation, which is weird because T2 created one of the most iconically great female action heroes ever. So like it's weird that you try to retcon that as well. But yeah, it's just strange, and it also like at least it was an alternate timeline, but it also had some things that just were kind of weird, like the justification for why Arnold Schwarzenegger had aged.
Well, that's the same one they have in Terminator Genesis. Like they had to, how else are you supposed to explain Arnold Schwarzenegger being in the movie at his
You
current
put
age?
him as a CGI Arnold Schwarzenegger that looks exactly like he did when he was in his mid-20s.
Now I will say Linda Hamilton comes back for Dark Fate, and she plays a great grizzled kind of older Sarah Connor. And they do like James Cameron also comes back for Dark Fate. Like he was not involved in any of the movies between T2 and Dark Fate. He's like one of the writers and producers of the one that just came out. And there's things that they do in the script to kind of like poke at you mentioned like female representation. Like there's things they acknowledge, oh, like you think you're so special, your womb is special because you're going to give birth to a man who's going to save the future. Like they're very clearly kind of attacking I guess you could say the patriarchal theme of the original movie.
Which is also a little odd because I do understand that people have made that critique, but at the same time, it was made clear from the beginning, like from Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 again, reinforced that it wasn't just that she gave birth to John Connors. She's the one who trained him. She's the one who prepared him for Judgment Day. Like Sarah Connors did all of these things in order that he would be the greatest leader.
Yeah, and they do. There is like a plot twist where you think, oh, she's just like Sarah Connor and she's going to give birth to the leader, but it turns out she's the leader herself in the future. So they further that storyline along to again distance itself from the the roots of the franchise.
Well, I mean, when is it set?
I think it's like present day because they don't really mention what year it is.
Because Judgment Day happened like 5 years ago, right? Or
yeah,
canonically, Judgment Day.
The movies like they don't mention what year it is.
Yes, they do.
In Dark Fate, I mean.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was gonna say they.
The Judgment Day is still at some point in the future, and also like it's not called Skynet, it's called Legion. So again, like part of this alternate universe version is that there's things that are different. Like the all the meat and potatoes are still there, but there's different vegetables kind of providing seasoning to the story.
Yeah.
Which again, in isolation, watching Dark Fate, I was like, this is an enjoyable movie, but I will acknowledge it repeats many things we've seen done better in T2.
Yeah. That's
And people agreed because when the movie came out, it got a very mixed response from critics and audiences, kind of saying we've seen enough of it, or like we've seen this enough times. And this further lends to my theory that bringing back the original creator doesn't necessarily always mean your movie is going to do well. Because people could say, well, the reason why T3 and the other movies in between sucked is because James Cameron wasn't involved. But lo and behold, you bring him back to work on Dark Fate, as involved as he was before.
well, as involved as a might be a bold claim. Like I obviously don't know the behind the scenes, but did he want to make that? Did he actively want to make that movie? Right? Because he actively wanted to make the first two. He had an idea and he worked towards it. Because that is another thing. Like if you have a project that you want to do and then you bring on the original creator and he didn't really have the ideas like kind of your project and you ask him to make it, to kind of fit it, then it's not the same, right? It's he can give a lot of creative input and maybe salvage some of the bad ideas but not fix them.
Well, he was one of the producers and he was one of the writers. So,
Okay. So perhaps, but it's hard to tell, especially when so much time has passed between the movies.
yeah. Now, I suppose we got to give, I guess, creative credit to Terminator Salvation and Terminator Genesis for being the ones that are the least like Terminator and Terminator 2.
Yeah, also Salvation is a solid movie. Not a great movie, but it's okay. It works.
And I think that's kind of a shame that I think Terminator Salvation, which came out in 2009, is most famous for Christian Bale's rant where he freaked out on a crew
Oh
member
yeah.
while they were filming. And I remember hearing about that. I was like, wow, he must be really into character. Like this movie must be super intense. They're playing out this war type scenario. He must be so into character that he's like getting like PTSD or something. And he's like freaking out on the crew when they mess up. And then I watched the movie. I'm like, this is just a generic war movie in a, sci-fi future. I'm like, this performance did not warrant that reaction at all.
No, which is like again, it's sad, but I think it's also sad because as I mentioned earlier, things like this movie explored a different aspect of the Terminator universe, right? Because as you said, it's all set in the future, and so it can kind of explore what the humans did and how the humans, it has a lot more of a kind of like Rogue One vibe, right? Where it's like, there's this event that happened, but how did it happen or why did it happen, right? And I feel like things like that could have worked, and, how the time machine was developed, perhaps, or how the humans put up the resistance. Like, those are things that I think were interesting and could have been, further worked upon. But then, for better or for worse, Terminator Salvation was just okay, and then they started to decide to do more with, the original storyline.
I don't think they're, yeah, because the first movie and the second movie, they tell you that John Connor is this great leader and he's so important that that Skynet wants to eliminate him because they know that John Connor is so important to the future that if they were to eliminate him, that they would win the battle with the humans. And we're also told through Kyle Reese that this future is so terrible and it's the worst. And, there's been this apocalypse, your imagination kind of goes wild in terms of what you imagine John Connor is and what you imagine this future is. And, you see little glimpses of it at the beginning of T2. And I think even like very briefly in the first Terminator. But at the end of the day, Terminator Salvation had to meet everyone's imagined expectations of what this post-apocalypse sci-fi future looked like and what John Connor was. And they didn't deliver on either of those things all that well.
Yeah, and like you could, like I don't know how you would necessarily fix it. Like I'm not going to say that I'm, you know, this is what was wrong with it. But it does feel kind of a shame that it didn't do that. But also, I feel like some people would have been upset if it had exactly like the same aesthetics as in the first Terminator, where it's like there's a completely dark sky and there's lasers and there's a bunch of T-800s without their meat suit going around with guns and firing at people. But at the same time, you could have made it like a pseudo oh not Battlefield Earth, that's a terrible movie. Starship Trooper, you know, kind of have a bit more military, like have it be more military and have it be more like grizzled resistance people and have like the combat actually appear rather than just having kind of like people running away from drones and being poor and living in squalid conditions.
And it's poorly lit. Like you can't like there's some things that are so dark you can't tell what's going on. It sort of feels like it has that gray filter on everything. Like it looks. Someone told I heard someone say, "Oh, it's like we're looking at the movie through a pair of sunglasses."
Yeah, I mean that's not inaccurate.
So, in terms of the contest of what is the worst Terminator movie, I think I want to give that prize, if you can call it a prize, to Terminator Genesis, which came out in 2015, 6 years after Salvation. And it is I see what they were trying to do. They were kind of trying to do like a Back to the Future Part 2 where they play with your expectations and they kind of adjust the timeline of the original movies, but it gets so convoluted so fast, and by the end of the movie I was like, this universe is broken. Like you didn't make it to the end, did you? You said you stopped.
No, I did. I don't remember where I stopped, but I do remember I was like, I don't know where they're going with this, and it's that thing where a movie is so bent on being clever it forgets to tell a good story or be a good movie. I feel like that's Genesis. It's trying so hard to be something that it's nothing.
Like the first 20 minutes or so are actually very promising. It kind of like establishes the beginning of the first Terminator. You see Kyle Reese being sent back in time to the 80s. But then once he arrives there, everything is different. All of a sudden, there's an older Arnold Terminator there. Sarah Connor is already like military trained and ready to fight, as opposed to being as she was in the original movie. And you discover that in this version of the story, a Terminator was sent back to save Sarah Connor even earlier and has been acting as like her dad. And then they time travel to 2017 to try and stop the new version of Skynet from happening. And by the end of the movie, old Arnold, Sarah Connor, and Kyle Reese drive off in a car. And I'm like, okay, they're in the year 2017. This Terminator who's with them is from some point in the future, but has lived all throughout history until this point. So he's not from this time period. You've got a Sarah Connor who's supposed to be from 1984, who's not from this time period. And you have Kyle Reese who's sent from like 2049, who's also not from this time period. So you have these three time travelers, all from different time periods, all living in the same time period. And how can this timeline not fall apart from all these people not being where they're supposed to be?
Yeah. Not to mention that, Judgment Day was in 1997 in 3-2, so,
And this is where it gets confusing because
And but that is also another thing, like, because the first two Terminator movies did a similar thing to, like, the first Men in Black movie, where it's like, this could be happening today, right? So they set a lot of the dates really close to when the actual release date is, and like the time the movie is supposed to be happening was when it was released in theaters.
yeah, because Judgment Day was supposed to be 1997, and the film, like the second one, came out in 1991, so it was in the future, but not too far away from.
Yeah. So
Oh.
it was 5 years later, I think, or close to that. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, it was an interesting shot, but yeah, but it didn't make enough sense, and it didn't. But and again, if it's kind of like if you're trying to be clever just for the sake of being clever, then congratulations, you're clever, but it doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't actually. If you don't have a proper investment in the characters or a proper treatment of the characters, and especially if there's two-way Genesis works, is that either there are infinite timelines, which means that, well, you need to spend a lot of time with a specific character from this timeline to care about this, because otherwise it's more or less meaningless because you're in an infinite multiverse. Or you know actually, no, that's pretty much the only thing, and that's the problem with it, is that it doesn't matter.
And unfortunately, all these sequels kind of invalidate the events of the second one. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, like you think that they've won, but actually, nope. Like the clock just seems to keep resetting itself.
And they keep finding more and more convoluted ways to reset the clock. Like in the first one, it was like, well, there was a special, defense program that had been started that used some part of the research that they destroyed and became self-aware. But like, or no, Skynet was just fully a military project and had nothing to do with anything that
Cyberdyne.
that Cyberdyne was doing. So it was kind of weird that way.
So I kind of want to give the worst movie award to T3 because it seems like, at least with Terminator Genesis, they tried to think out the box and they did something different, whereas T3 is most blatantly in my mind, the one that's most blatantly ripping off the previous ones.
I feel like T3, I feel like Genesis is still a worse movie because it doesn't have as much of a structure and enjoyability, but T3 is the most lazy.
So if we're going by objective quality,
I think T3 is a better movie. It still has a decent score. It has a story that outside of the franchise makes more sense than Genesis.
Okay.
But it definitely does more to ruin the franchise, and it is the reason why everything started going downhill. You know what? Let's give it to T3.
All right, T3 is the worst. But Terminator Genesis is very close to that.
Just for different reasons.
So this is kind of a sad story if you think of it. You had this more or less indie film that was moderately successful, was done well enough to get a sequel, which became a huge success. And unfortunately, I think it kind of set that standard for, you make a sequel to something, everything's got to be bigger and you got to have a bigger budget and there's got to be more.
Yeah, and again, it can be, but it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, yes, the larger budget helped Terminator 2, but what makes Terminator 2 a better movie and a better sequel is not necessarily the fact that the film had a larger budget and there were more explosions.
Yeah, it's the fact that it expanded on the themes, it added its own, unique identity, it added more depth to the characters, it expanded the universe, it did all those things that a sequel is supposed to do. And it also had great visual effects. Like you can't take that away. T2 has visual effects that stand up to this day, which for a film made in 1991 is amazing. But it also just was a well-constructed, well-crafted movie.
And unfortunately, every success film they've made since then has never been able to hit that level. Like Terminator Salvation was, like you said, kind of like just fine. And I'd say the same about Terminator Dark Fate, is that it's just fine, but it feels lazy again because the things that they do differently aren't different enough.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like how everybody was really upset when they announced Toy Story 4, because Toy Story 3 had closed it up so well, and you're like, there is no need for another movie. I mean, Toy Story 4 arguably
Toy Story 4
still worked, but Terminator 3 didn't. Terminator 2 closed the story off beautifully, and it worked, and it was this perfect little bundle. And then T3 would have had to add something significantly good or different in order to justify its existence, and it was neither good nor different.
So if I could time travel, I would go back in time and erase Terminator 3 from existence, and I would erase Terminator Salvation from existence, because I think that if you went from just Terminator 2 to Terminator Salvation and just showing that future, and then maybe have Dark Fate as like an alternate timeline story, that might have worked.
Yeah, but then again, if you're using the rules of time travel in Terminator movies, well, actually, it doesn't matter because they change after 2. And, like, I feel like 3, Genesis, and Dark Fate all have different time traveling rules that are different from each other and from the first 2 movies.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's any future. I mean, it's funny that these movies are all about the future, but I don't know if there really is a future for the Terminator franchise. I think
I
this is
feel
it.
like if, and that's the thing, that's the other problem with Genesis being kind of terrible, and then Dark World being kind of meh, is that they did bring new actors in that might have been able to keep the franchise going, but it didn't work. And I don't think Schwarzenegger is coming back, and I don't think, like,
You don't think he'll be back?
no, I don't think he'll be back as the Terminator. I mean, who knows? Maybe he'll do it again, but like, if you don't, but now if you don't have the T-800 or Sarah Connors, you don't have a Terminator movie, and you know, we have seen what happens when you put older actors in too many action movies. You get Taken 3.
So this might be it. I think the Terminator franchise has in fact been terminated.
You are terminated. See, that's the other thing. T3 did have that line, and it was good.
And I think this franchise should serve as a cautionary tale for filmmakers. This is what happens when you make your sequels too much like the ones that came before. And then, just sometimes it works. You make a bad movie and you just ignore it and the next one's good. But it obviously didn't work in the case of Terminator, because they just kept making more movies, ignoring the previous one, and never really recovered. So I'm not sure where you can stream all these things. I know Terminator Genesis and Terminator Dark Fate you can watch for free on Amazon Prime Video. The rest of them you can rent on there for some reason. And I think some of
Guys,
them,
you should have bought DVDs when they were still a thing.
yeah. I mean, I have
That's
Terminator
what I
2 on
did.
DVD. I figure that's the only one worth having on
Well, I've
maybe
got the first 2 on DVD.
okay.
Actually, I think I have T3 on DVD. I'm not sure.
Oh,
Well, I started again. I started watching these movies when I wasn't good at finding movies online, and streaming services were still mailing CDs to you. So Netflix was still a mailbox. So I had to buy a movie if I wanted to watch it.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at,
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at.
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
so normally we'd go inside the Bat Jar and pull out our topic for next time, but we are reaching that point where the floodgates are opening wide for new movies to be released, and we have Venom:
Let there be carnage.
I have avoided the trailers for this because I'm learning that I seem to enjoy movies more when I haven't been spoiled for all the things that are in them.
Okay, fair enough. But I have seen the first 2 trailers, I think, and it looks like a lot of fun. Which I think is what they were aiming for, so I think it might be hitting what it wanted to do.
So please feel free, everyone, in the spirit of the time travel that we talked about this week, go back and listen to our episode on the first Venom movie from 2018. I don't remember being too kind to the movie. I think I complained a lot about just the making a Venom movie without Spider-Man in it. So I think I'm still riding that train, but I probably felt more strongly about it back then.
Yeah, but at least actually no, at that point too, there was the whole Sony Disney debacle going on. It's just stronger now.
Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. It'll be in theaters only. So if you do want to see the movie, you'll have to get to a movie theater or find a Yahoo pirate. Arr.
I got what you were saying. Don't worry.
And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm beef pork ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
That was my Carnage imitation.